Hello, everybody. How are you doing tonight? I'm doing pretty well, in spite of a rough day. I had a rough day because I couldn't sleep last night. Only got about an hour and a half. But I did get a nap at 4:30 today. That helped a lot. So, hi, Bonnie. How you doing? And hi, Dolores. Hi, Deborah Wilson. Stacy. How you doing, Stacy? Hi, Kay. Randy Hedgebeth, hello. Russ Goldman, great to see you. It's great to see all of you. Lana, it's great to see you too. I'm glad you're all here. And I think there are a few of you I have not managed to identify yet, but I'll get there. Russ says something in the air. I got about 5 hours last night. Yeah, it must be all the rain and stuff in the air. My sinuses were real jammed up. And they didn't get really clear until I took a hot shower this morning. Anyway, let's get started. The topic is politics and government. It's all a neoliberal mess. Uh, Actually, the topic is, the neoliberal mess in the United States and, quote, trending on Twitter, unquote, because something important has been trending on Twitter today. So, which reminds me, I don't have Twitter up. There it is. My camera's gone south. I'm going to try to get it back now. Sorry, that was the first of the glitches. I'm sure we'll have a few more because, as Russ says, there's something in the air. So, and we're in the air, right? So that's it. Anyway, let's get to the first of our articles tonight. Someone's finally said it, folks. Finally said it. Citing utter inability to discharge duties of his office, quote unquote. Wow. The Move On group demands Trump's removal under the 25th Amendment. This is by Julia Conley, a staff writer. It was written on April 24th, published on April 24th anyway. And of course, this was the reaction to his openly speculating about injecting disinfectants into coronavirus patients using large amounts of ultraviolet rays to treat the virus. Yeah, so he's going to give everybody who has the virus cancer and kill them with poison. Oh, God. He's going to burn them, he's going to poison them at the same time so he can cure them from the coronavirus. So Move On Friday publicly called for Trump's cabinet to invoke the 25th Amendment and remove the president from office. Bonnie and I think that's a really good idea. But of course, we doubt that Trump's cabinet is going to do that. I mean, but who knows? A few more of these statements and more drops in the polls. I mean, who knows what can happen? Anyway, the reaction to the pronouncements by Trump about the burning and poisoning people has been forcing doctors to issue public statements pleading with Americans to ignore the president's advice. And that's been going on, of course, the whole weekend. Everybody's been laughing and talking and just in general saying, boy, what an idiot this guy is. And so Move On says, here comes the 25th. It's not just Trump's words, quote, but his actions that reveal his utter inability to discharge the duties of his office, said Rana Epting, the group's executive director. And then, of course, earlier this month, he repeatedly touted hydroxychloroquine as a potential treatment for COVID-19. At least 3 people in Nigeria were hospitalized in late March after overdosing on the drug following Trump's statements about the medication. You shouldn't be laughing, it's not funny. And then, of course, there's that man in Arizona who died and whose wife confirmed that her husband used the substance because of the president's remarks in a televised briefing. So Publius tweeted, if the 25th Amendment is not used when a deranged, utterly irrational POTUS tells Americans to ingest disinfectants to treat COVID-19, then what is its purpose? And Elizabeth C. McLaughlin said, I mean, if there ever was a reason to invoke the 25th Amendment, the President of the United States telling Americans to inject disinfectant and raise their hands to the sun to kill a pandemic virus is it. And Matt O'Brien, who's a journalist and opinion writer, said, you might as well get rid of the 25th Amendment now if we're not going to get rid of President Bleach right now. 2017, former Deputy Attorney General Rod Rosenstein suggested recruiting cabinet members to invoke the 25th Amendment and said secret recordings of Trump would prove him to be unfit to serve as president. Section 4 of the 25th Amendment reads as follows. Whenever the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the executive departments or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives the written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the power and duties of his office, the Vice President shall immediately assume the powers and duties of the office as acting President. Thereafter, when the President transmits to the President pro tempore of the Senate, the Speaker of the House of Representatives, his written declaration that no inability exists, he shall resume the powers and duties of his office unless the Vice President and a majority of either the principal officers of the Executive Department or of such other body as Congress may by law provide, transmit within 4 days to the President pro tempore of the Senate and the Speaker of the House of Representatives their written declaration that the President is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. So in other words, it's possible for a majority of the Cabinet and the Vice President to vote Mr. Trump off the farm. Thereupon, Congress shall decide the issue, assembling within 48 hours for that purpose, if not in session. If the Congress within 21 days after receipt of the latter written declaration, or if Congress is not in session within 21 days after Congress is required to assemble, determines by two-thirds votes of both houses that the president is unable to discharge the powers and duties of his office. The vice president shall continue to discharge the same as acting president. Otherwise, the president shall resume the powers and duties of his office. So that's the real barrier. It's getting two-thirds of both houses. And so Mitch McConnell is in a position to save Trump from the 25th Amendment. But at least people are openly talking about it again. And I got to believe that's good. So, we have two terrible people running for the presidency. It would be nice to have one of them out of the picture through the exercise of the 25th Amendment. It might clarify the thinking in people's minds, since they would no longer be frightened out of their wits by the prospect of having another 4 years of Donald Trump. Maybe they could then act in a rational way. So on balance, that might be very good. But anyway, next, highest levels since the Great Depression. Quote, sobering, unquote, CBO analysis projects 16% unemployment in U.S. By this year. Now, I take unemployment rates and percentages of unemployment very, very seriously. Okay? Made a mistake a few days ago. I estimated the unemployment rate based on a labor participation force of 171 million. It isn't really that high. I got my numbers confused. So I have to do penance for that, which I will. And it turns out the true figure is closer to 168 million. Now, the estimate of the labor force, which BLS is currently giving, is 164.6 million. Or at least that was what it was at the end of February of 2020. I think that figure, is an undercount because it doesn't count people who are detached from the labor force, but who would take full-time jobs if they were available. Those people have dropped out of the labor force because they've become increasingly discouraged. But they're neither in the U3 group of unemployed or the U6 group, of unemployed. The 164.6 people only included the U3 and U6 people. So it's really about 168 million. So let us note again that we're already at 32.5 million unemployed. Let's divide that by 168. That tells us that the unemployment rate is currently 19.3%. Now, CBO is doing something a little different because I was calculating this based on current figures. But CBO was evidently looking at what it felt would be quarterly totals. And for the second quarter of 2020, and I assume this is fiscal year 2020, The second quarter was from January through the end of March. But I don't know, maybe it is the calendar year. If it's the calendar year, they're even more wrong. But if it's the fiscal year, then 14%, okay, in the second quarter. Uh, okay, is probably about right. But by now, we're at April 25th already, and we're well into the third quarter, and we're already at 19.3%. Now, this was written by Julia Conley on Friday, April 24th. And so it was based on the latest unemployment figures in part. It's based on what CBO is predicting. And CBO, of course, is very much respected in Washington, but not by me. I don't think that their ability to project is worth a damn. They usually underestimate things like the unemployment rate. Now, the Federal Reserve is actually projected that by the end of June, which is the end of the third quarter, of course, that we will have something like 52 million people unemployed. 52 million people is going to be $52 million people is going to be 31% of the labor force unemployed, eclipsing by a great deal the highest figure of the Depression of the 30s, which was 24.9%. So there we are. It looks terrible. Why does CBO grossly underestimate it? Why do they do that? Because they're always projecting from the past, to the future, and they're not supplementing that with a little bit of intelligent speculation. They point out currently more than 26 million Americans have filed jobless claims in the past 5 weeks. That's right. But they forgot the other 6 million that were already jobless at that time, and very few of them have probably found jobs. So we're probably looking at 32.4 million Americans. So here we are. That's where we get 19.3%. That, and also my using the 168 million figure rather than 164.6 million figure actually makes the unemployment rate seem smaller. If I use the 164.6 million figure, okay, if you like that figure better, then it would be even higher. it would be 19.6% as opposed to 19.3%. So the question, why can't CBO get it right? But of course, the big thing is not whether CBO gets it right or doesn't get it right. I mean, the big thing is that they're trying to underestimate the total mess we're in from the standpoint of cable unemployment. I want to go over briefly 3 days of posts from the unsanitized column, which is Dave Dayen's column from the American Prospect. And you'll see why in a minute. But Dave wrote this on April 23rd, 2020. Title of it is Unsanitized, the fight to learn who the Fed will bail out. Yes, the Fed wanted to keep it all secret about who they were going to bail out. See, they've got this, as you know, they have this huge slush fund of $4.6 trillion in a $4.6 trillion fund to lend money to very large corporations. But then there are also the loans being made in the PPP program. That's a program for forgivable small business loans. Okay, that's the program where the original $350 billion that was appropriated for that particular program got sold out basically within 2 weeks' time, and they had to pass this other bill just a few days ago to add another $250 billion to that. Well, they found that 2 luxury hotel companies made off with $46 million in PPP forgivable small business loan for such high-end brand locations as Ritz-Carlton, Marriott, and Sofitel. The companies paid a combined $13 million to top executives last year. So maybe they're borrowing the money to pay those salaries. And he says, we know this because the Braemar Hotels and Ashford Hospitality Trust were required to disclose the loans in SEC filings. But the Fed has not committed, as of the 23rd, had not committed to releasing detailed transaction-level information about its lending. It has interpreted the CARES Act disclosure requirements to mean they only need to give aggregate disclosure to terms and rules of the various and rules that were for the lending facilities they set up, not the names of the individual companies getting the loans. Then every 30 days, they have to supply the total amount that was lent out and the interest they received. This is being driven by the business community, which doesn't want bailout stigma after receiving support from the Fed. I'm all for giving them bailout stigma, aren't you? I'm not sure why they think it won't arouse suspicions if a travel company or some other large firm suddenly starts expanding out of nowhere after months without any revenue. So anyway, Dave is making the case that it's pretty important to get the Fed to disclose. And Austin Goolsbee, who used to be a part of the Obama-Biden economic team, explained pretty clearly to Politico why the Fed doesn't want to disclose company names. Quote, the reason they're not releasing the lists is people will start holding them accountable for who's getting the money, unquote. Oh, that was a brilliant thought, wasn't it? But it's true. It's kind of the flashbacks of 2008, 2009 that it's going to matter for the credibility of this program and whether We, the American people, think it is working and want to keep engaging in it, unquote. Bharat, Bharat Ramamurthy, one of four members of the bailout oversight panel, has been among the few calling for detailed transparency around who is getting a piece of what could be as much as $4.5 trillion in loans. For all we know, some of that money has already been released without any information about who got what. So there used to be a definition, of politics by a very famous political scientist, by the name, of Lasswell, Harold Lasswell. And his way of defining politics, well, actually it's from a title of one of his books. It was entitled Politics, Who Gets What, When, and How. Of course, the Fed didn't want to tell us who was getting what. After pressure from Mr. Bharat and Americans for Financial Reform, the Fed has only committed to, quote, information regarding participants in the corporate credit facilities, without any details about what that information will be. Will it even be the identity of the participants, or what they will do in its numerous other lending facilities? It could mean industry level aggregates or raw number of borrowers, or anything. It's true that, like with the hotel chains, public companies might have to file something with the SEC, but the beneficiaries of Fed lending might not all be private companies. Private equity portfolio companies could use Fed resources, for example. The press will be vital and have already ferreted out some information. And there's a link to a Taibbi article on that. But there's no substitute for systematic transaction level transparency. Dave says there aren't many conditions being placed on this money to begin with to ensure it stabilizes the real economy rather than flowing up to executives and investors. But transparency can help raise the pressure. Once you see that Company X receives several billion in low-cost loans, you can tie it to what we already know about Company X, its executive compensation, its use of financial engineering to will ever be placed. They will happen because of the name and shame possibilities that accompany disclosure. Relying on the Fed so heavily to save the economy already will shuttle the relief through large corporations and Wall Street banks. That's how the Fed operates as an institution, and it colors our pandemic response. Operating in the dark is even worse. And Dave points out, we already had this fight during the bailout of 2008-2009. The Fed claimed they were only giving banks liquidity assistance in the short term to deal with the credit crunch. But this bailout will go to companies throughout the economy with loans up to 4 years. And of course, you know by now that in 2008, 2009, 2010, 2011, 2012, the Fed used $27 trillion in total credit facilities they made available to large financial institutions. They didn't want us to know that, but a couple of graduate students ferreted it out, and now we know that. Of course, they seem to have stopped counting in 2012, so we don't know what's happened since then. Going on, knowing this information is vital to knowing whether the taxpayer has been ripped off on a galactic scale compared to the penny ante small business loan schemes. Anyway, we eventually got the information about the 2008-2009 bailout because Bloomberg, the company, sued the Fed and got some information. Are we going to have to sue them again? I don't know. And some comments on Donna Shalala. Our old friend Donna Shalala is feeling a bit of pressure to abandon her post on the bailout oversight panel. Yesterday, the Revolving Door Project on Demand Progress formally called on House leadership to encourage Shalala to step down. The Project on Government Oversight joined them after Shalala admitted to violating the Stock Act by failing to disclose stock transactions. So there's a quote there, which I'm not going to give to you, but you get the point. And Dave says, this is way too easy to explain. You have a member of an oversight panel who has admitted to being ignorant of oversight rules. The near-term fight, as written above, is about disclosure, and she didn't disclose. But Shalala has twisted into knots trying to explain this. But she had an interview with a local CBS affiliate, and she said, quote, I knew what the law was, unquote, but yet didn't follow it multiple times. Even now, Nancy Pelosi is sticking by her friend and declining to withdraw the nomination. Spokesperson Drew Hamill said, Shalala, quote, has the Speaker's complete confidence, unquote. Birds of a feather, right? Saying she's, quote, taken responsibility for her mistakes, has been working with the Ethics Committee to address this issue since she became aware of it. So Dave says, to be clear, she blew off Stock Act reporting for a year and 4 months until Tuesday. We'll see if the pressure rises, but it would be good to have someone in that position trying to get the Fed to release the names of the companies it will bail out instead of scrambling to explain why she broke the law. So, as some of you may know, the House was all set to allow proxy voting until yesterday. Yesterday was April 22nd, that was Wednesday, when it was unceremoniously yanked from the floor. There was significant, maybe unanimous Republican opposition to the idea. Now there will be a bipartisan study commission on the idea, which is what Washington does when they don't want anything to happen. And they says it is possible Washington it's possible that Democrats couldn't get enough colleagues to Washington to win a vote on proxy voting, but at a real level this is disenfranchisement of hundreds of millions of constituents and their representatives. Nancy Pelosi has been running a one-woman House for a month without those meddling elected representatives and their concerns okay to deal with. I think I've actually gone through this part before, so I'm not going to continue with it, but you get the deal. So Nancy Pelosi is a lame duck, and even though she's a lame duck, she's doing all kinds of outrageous things to deny the representatives we have elected their right to represent us, making use of the COVID crisis to do it. So, this was Dave's column for April 24th. Whatever Mnuchin wants, whatever Mnuchin gets. And he just goes through a real brief thing. Same day, Congress added $321 billion for the Paycheck Protection Program, PPP, forgivable small business loans. The PPP got another cash infusion from companies giving back their loans. The much maligned Ruth's Chris Steakhouse returned $20 million on Thursday, as did salad chain Sweet Green, the Kura Sushi family of restaurants, and several other relatively large public companies. Why would they? Well, I guess they had, in terms of the letter of what they were reading about the law, they evidently felt they were eligible to apply. And of course, their loans went sailing right through because they're big companies. Anyway, Mnuchin and the Treasury Department have reset the program after it became apparent that these kinds of companies were getting these loans. In new guidance, Treasury emphasized that PPP recipients must certify the loan is necessary to support the ongoing operations of the applicant, unquote. Can you imagine? That wasn't even in there before. And that publicly traded companies with access to capital markets would be unlikely to meet that standard. They could return the money by May 7th and face no sanction. A clear signal that the failure to return it would trigger an investigation. And Mnuchin said that out loud on Thursday, in fact. So Treasury, by essentially threatening bigger companies that they would be in legal and financial trouble if they kept the loan money, dictated this response. The public outcry at Ruth's Chris and others necessitated the response, but Treasury had to pull the trigger and preserve the reputation of the program. Dave says, you can see that the emphasis on individual firms in the program as a way to protect the big banks, which clearly gave special treatment to high-level business clients. Sorry. With $10 billion in fees at stake and no real difference between processing a $100,000 PPP loan and a $10 million one, it was obvious that big banks would structure the order of the loans in favorable ways. But though congressional leaders have questioned bank CEOs about this activity, Treasury Secretary Mnuchin has remained quiet on that program abuse. Now, you remember that Treasury doubled the interest rate on PPP loans before the program got started. Meanwhile, let's point out the guidance Treasury has yet to make, protecting the $1,200 CARES Act payments from banks and private debt by collectors, grabbing them to cover outstanding debts. The last we heard was that Treasury was reviewing the situation on Monday. We've since heard more real-world examples of payments being taken by banks and debt collectors. Some states have stepped up, but Treasury hasn't budged. Congress callously wasted the opportunity to fix this by protecting the payments from private debt collection in the legislation that passed just yesterday. But that doesn't get Treasury off the hook. Treasury spokesperson told me they have not yet come to any decision on the matter. And Dave says, because we have effectively a planned economy planned by mostly one man, specifically Mr. Mnuchin. His whims form the basis of how our economy works. If he wants an oil bailout, as he hinted at yesterday, we'll get an oil bailout. If he wants equity states from bailed out companies, we'll get equity states. Whatever Mnuchin wants, Mnuchin gets. Sometimes that's accidentally good, as you can argue in the case of kicking public companies out of the PPP loans. They're sure to have a safety net in the Federal Reserve's so-called larger Main Street lending program, so I wouldn't worry about them. Sometimes it's not. That is, sometimes it's better, sometimes it's worse. So Mnuchin's life experience played into this decision-making. He bought a failed subprime lender and turned it into one of the worst banks during the foreclosure crisis. Yes, it was full of foreclosure fraud, which Kamala Harris refused to prosecute for, while taking a $2,800 contribution from Mr. Mnuchin, or was it $2,700? I forget what the limit was. It was at the limit, though. So now he looks away when they structure PPP loans and grab checks meant for desperate people to survive. I'd expect special treatment for Hollywood producers and Wall Street friends of the Treasury Secretary. As he is a Trump loyalist, there should be a lot of concern about how Mnuchin manages bailout terms for cronies and affiliates of the president. Power has been handed over to and transactional mediocrity, making monumental decisions seemingly based on personal relationships. Welcome to Minution Monomics. Minution Monomics. That's a tongue twister, isn't it? So yesterday, Dave says, I told you about a major fight over Federal Reserve transparency, as the central bank had not clarified whether it would disclose the names of companies receiving bailout funds. Later that day, the Fed announced that it would release monthly reports about which companies received the bailouts, at what size, and with what interest rate. And Mr. Ramamurthy, who had been urging this step, called it a significant victory for the public, quote unquote. I think it is. This mostly complies with existing law. The Dodd-Frank Act required the Fed to disclose this kind of information in all emergency lending programs under Section 13.3. There was some wiggle room in that language that the Fed could afford on, but that would have defied reality. Matt Stoller of the American Economic Liberties Project authored that Fed transparency piece of Dodd-Frank. I didn't know that. As he told me, quote, in 2010, the Fed told everyone that the world would collapse if there were any disclosure. It did not collapse, and the Fed knows it, unquote. Stoller has in the past worked for Bernie Sanders and is quite well known to Sanders people. Pretty sure he was involved in the 2016 campaign. Don't think he was involved in the 2020 campaign. And lately he's had some harsh comments about some of the things Bernie has done on that particular campaign. But Matt is extremely bright and has a great deal of integrity, intellectual integrity. And he is the master of the Twitter thread, of the devastating Twitter thread. Like just last week, he put out a 24-tweet Twitter thread. We'll know how meaningful the Fed's promise is later when it releases the first set of disclosures. The Fed has also yet to explain whether it will apply this standard to other programs that don't involve CARES Act funds. And for programs like the Term Asset-Backed Securities Loan Facility, the TASLF, used to purchase securitizations, where we get a list of the securities or the underlying business loans inside. Okay, there's a little more in that vein here, but what's clear is Dave is fighting to clean up the act of the Fed, and is fighting to try to make sure that these various loans, are negotiated on a legitimate basis and not simply as crony loans, but for the benefit of Donald Trump and his cronies. So that's it for the column on the 24th. So today's column, the 25th. Let me share this. I've been supposed to be sharing these things, but I haven't been doing so. It's probably okay with you because I've been going through them fairly rapidly. So this one's on the coronavirus in part, and I'm sure some of you know, I knew this if you were on the internet today. Okay, fatalities in the United States due to the coronavirus are at 50,000, at least 50,000. Much more than 50,000, says Dave. Yeah, it is much more than 50,000. Because people are dying at home and they're not getting recorded. First response, this space has been focusing lately on the economic fallout of the crisis, the various bailout programs, the plight of essential workers, how people will survive, among a depression, in the middle of a depression. The backdrop to all of it, of course, is a churning machine of mass death, and we should use some occasions to put it in the foreground. So this is one of those occasions. It's by human nature to avoid talk of death, to focus on by reopening the country and peaks on a curve, and maybe some comic relief from the president on swallowing disinfectants whole. But we crossed a milestone yesterday, or at least a milestone, quote unquote, for reasons I'll explain shortly. We hit 50,000 officially recorded deaths from coronavirus in the United States. The number trackers have tried to dial this back on the 50,000 by deciding not to count 5,100 people in New York City believed to have died from coronavirus who went without testing. The city includes them in their own count. This is why it's imperative to use the phrase officially recorded. So many deaths aren't being included in counts because the individual died at home without being tested. Excess mortality over a normal year appears to be fairly uniformly twice as high as the official death toll from COVID-19. Some of that could be from other ailments exacerbated by a fear of going to the hospital under these conditions, or a lack of medical capacity, but based on those numbers, I wouldn't be surprised if we were approaching 100,000 deaths right now. I wouldn't be surprised either. And then Dave simply describes the situation with so many people out there working, at various things, in places that are dangerous. Basically, frontline people risking their lives to do their jobs. That 50,000 people are dead is a cataclysmic event, in American history, says Dave. And of course, he is quite right about that. It gets close to the fatalities we experienced in the Vietnam War, and this is just in a few weeks. Whereas the war in Vietnam, those casualties in the war in Vietnam was over 9 years. And this has just happened in in a month and a half, something like that. I should add, there's no definitive indication that we're on the downward slope of this catastrophe. The model latched onto by the White House and the media, about 60,000 total deaths, was obviously faulty and outdated, even though it is inexplicably still being used. We have bounced around at around 2,000 deaths per day for a week or so, and the aggregate tells you nothing about where the individual states are in their curves. Some, like New York, have peaked. Others, like Ohio, Massachusetts, and Arizona, plainly have not. Still others, like New Jersey and Texas, are somewhere in between. The long plateau reflects a conglomeration of all these different timelines, and it means there will be at least as many, if not more, deaths on the downward slope as there were on the upward slope. So we're looking at after being scared off by the initial 2 million deaths if you do nothing, which came out of the UK model, the White House started touting a range of 100,000 to 240,000 deaths, and then abandoned that for the 60,000 estimate once that was produced. The earlier range now looks far more likely, and of course that's without any new spike from premature ends to social distancing measures, or a second wave in the fall, both of which seem pretty likely. Testing shows a small 3-day long uptick after nearly a month of stagnation. It's still nowhere near the level needed for comprehensive testing and tracing. We know perilously little about this disease, says Dave, why it causes strokes in otherwise healthy young people, why the immune response can become so overwhelming that it kills people, whether you can catch it more than once. Science will eventually provide us answers, treatments, and vaccines. Until then, we cannot forget the reason why we're staying inside, the reason why we're pulling bandanas out of our closets, the reason why we just can't go to our favorite pad thai place with our friends. I feel guilty of this forgetting myself. If you have stories about people you knew that succumbed to this virus, email me. At least 50,000 are dead, probably many more. We can be strong and resilient without actually blocking them out of our memory. So Dave is saying, remember the dead. Remembering the dead is the only way of taking the measures needed to stop this from happening again. Maybe people will think twice before they nominate such terrible candidates for the presidency as they did in 2016 and as they appear to be getting ready to do right now. Small town America has been struggling from the COVID crisis. But Joe Manchin, senator from West Virginia, says, but telehealth is wonderful if you have internet service, and if you're in rural America, you don't. Doctors are reimbursed for telehealth, but not audio calls that frequently are the only option in rural areas. There goes my camera. I hope it'll be simple. I'm sorry. Sometimes when the camera goes, all I have to do to restore it is to click a button and it goes right on. But at other times, the button does not work because the camera setting has been disturbed somehow. Then I have to go into my camera mic settings, and in the process, I have to cut the mic off. That's when you can neither hear me nor see me. Then I have to reset the camera, unmute the mic, and then turn on the camera once again. So that's why things are going on in the way they are going on. Not such a good way. So that's basically what I wanted to cover in Dave's columns for right now. He is very important right now because he is really watching the Fed and really watching the loan programs, looking for fraud, looking for misconduct. And he has great sources by now. He's been writing in this vein for years and years now, since 2010, and before even. And he's one of the leading figures in this field of uncovering fraud in these federal programs. So his column is very, very important. He's also economically fairly sophisticated, Having had some exposure to MMT, but actually over a period of years, uh, his column is worth watching every day. So here we are again. This on April 24th. We need Congress to get a grip. The Democrats are urged to end, delay, fight like hell for COVID-19 relief that puts people first. This was written by Jake Johnson. And there's Nancy Pelosi, orange suit, white top, pink bandana, flag pin on her lapel. My camera's gone off again. Hopefully this time it will just take a flick of the button. Sorry, but I am back. And she's giving a news conference. And the articles, in the article, Jake Johnson says, frustration with the Democratic leadership, on the part of the progressives is boiling over following the House's near unanimous passage Thursday of an interim coronavirus relief package that provides no direct relief to vulnerable people and kicks life or death priorities into next month, even as tens of millions of people don't know how they're going to afford rent and other basic necessities. So they go home, the Senate goes home until May 4th, or they just took a recess. And now, of course, they're taking another recess because they don't want to be vulnerable to the coronavirus, of course. As little as possible do they want to be sitting in the Senate. So that's what is going on there. Sorry again. Okay, back. House Speaker Nancy Pelosi and Senate Leader Chuck Schumer, he's the minority leader of the Democrats, both promised that while they fail to secure funding for states and localities, an increase in nutrition assistance or protections for frontline workers in the interim bill, or basic incomes for people who have lost their work, they will be sure to push for the inclusion of those proposals in the next COVID-19 package. That will be the centerpiece of our next acts, Pelosi said in a speech on Thursday outside advocacy groups. And a handful of the progressives in Congress are expressing outrage at the Democratic leadership's repeated, quote, we'll do better next time approach in the middle of a deadly pandemic. The House is not expected to return to D.C. again until May 4th at the earliest. And Morris Pearl, chair of the Patriotic Millionaires, says, quote, just wait until the next bill is not good enough anymore. If these are truly legislative priorities for members of Congress, as they should be, they need to start fighting for them, says Morris. There's one millionaire on our side. Quote, "It is absurd that over a month into a national lockdown, we still do not have, by universal paid sick leave, forcing essential workers who feel ill to put themselves and everyone around them at risk just to pay their bills," said Pura. Quote again, "It is absurd that as bills continue to accumulate for millions without steady streams of income, the federal government is giving no more than a one-time payment of $1,200. Also, that's a promise. I haven't gotten my $1,200. Have you gotten yours yet? Have you gotten yours yet? Has anybody gotten theirs? Let us know if you have." Let us know if you have. George Goel, director of People's Action, urged Congress to quickly pass 3 bills that have already been introduced in the House. What 3 bills are those? One is Ilhan Omar's plan to cancel all rent and mortgage payments for the duration of the coronavirus crisis. The next is the Jayapal Tlaib plan to provide all households with $2,000 monthly payments and $1,000 a month after the crisis is over for the next year. And then the third bill is Jayapal's plan to provide no-cost emergency health care for all. And progressives are also demanding that Congress approve emergency funding for the U.S. Postal Service. Also money for nationwide vote-by-mail funding for cities and states. Oh, and funding for cities and states. Hazard pay for frontline workers. Also an increase in federal nutrition assistance, SNAP that is, and more. Goel said Speaker Pelosi and Democrats have made big promises for the next rescue package, said Goel. The people of this country have shown incredible patience, but that patience is wearing thin. When we get to the next CARES Act, it better be one hell of a package, because the interim bill is a raw deal when we need the next New Deal. We need Congress to get a grip. The first step in getting Congress to get a grip is to get Nancy Pelosi to get a grip, of course. It's her grip that's been getting lost here. There was a letter to Pelosi and Schumer on Friday. Nearly 50 progressive advocacy groups said that as Republicans attempt to exploit the coronavirus to further enrich their already wealthy donors and undermine democracy, the Democrats must put forth and fight for a relief package that puts people first. And of course, as you have heard here in past streams, of course the Democrats have not been doing that. They have not actually done that. They've gotten us a pittance, not what we need to handle this particular crisis. Article mentions, of course, that Mitch McConnell is suddenly concerned about the growing national debt, and Pelosi accused McConnell of notion-mongering to get attention, unquote, and promised that the next bill, which she dubbed the HEROES Act, is coming soon. Quote, "Let us be clear, the health and safety of our country will be endangered if we cannot pay the heroes who sacrificed to keep us safe," unquote, Pelosi said, referring to frontline workers. Anyway, the squad, of course, is pressing leadership to provide a clear timeline on when the next relief package will come together and get a vote. Ocasio-Cortez was the only House Democrat to vote against the interim bill. I don't think a clear timeline is going to be forthcoming, at least not from the Senate, until the pressure really builds up from the unemployed and other victims of the crisis, leaning on their representatives to do what needs to be done to take care of the working families caught in the middle of the pandemic. Ocasio-Cortez tweeted Thursday, "Someday and next time doesn't cut it. Struggling families need a timeline. Struggling families need a bill that bails them out." And Rashida said Congress should be voting on immediate relief for families today. We need a clear timeline of when people are demanding recurring inclusive payments, water and utilities shut off, the protection and support of by local governments and state governments too, by the way. And Ilhan Omar is tweeting something similar. And Jayapal and Pocan, the co-chairs of the CPC, said in a joint statement Thursday that House Democrats must lead with vision and urgency by passing legislation that meets the immense needs of this moment, unquote. And that's the gist of that article. Why don't people have why don't they have a relief bill yet? Why hasn't there been a relief bill for people? Because under neoliberalism, the people come last. The big corporations come first. State and local governments also come very low down on the priority list. Small business has a lower priority than the large businesses, than the titans of industry, and finance, because they are at the heart of the neoliberal system. All of us are further out, further away from the heart, the heart of the system. And as for working people, we are the cannon fodder of that system. We are the consumers of that system who go into debt, in order to consume, and whose debts the neoliberals never want to forgive. They never want to forgive those debts. They want their debts to be forgiven. They want them to get all kinds, of bailout loans. But it's everything for them, and nothing for us. When will we decide that that is over? That we're not taking it anymore? That if that's what they insist on, we're going to tear down that system because we don't want to have anything but to do with it. So, as polls show, there's nearly 90% Democrat support. For what? For Medicare for all. Biden was told his hostility to Medicare for all is no longer a tenable position for you. John Kelly, staff writer, wrote this today, of Common Dreams. He wrote this today. And the poll showed nearly 90% approval among Democratic voters for Medicare for all. And that created fresh calls for Joe Biden the party's presumptive nominee, to end his outdated opposition to the health care solution that would cover all Americans at less overall cost than the current, more wasteful for-profit system. The Hill-Harris-X survey was released on Friday, and of course it arrived in the middle of the pandemic, and it showed overall voter support for Medicare for All at 69%, nearly 70%. But 88% for Democrats, okay, for those who are registered Democrats. If we move to independents, support now sits at 68%, while even among Republicans, support sits at 46%. Speaking to Hill TV on the findings, one Felicia Wong, who's the president and CEO of the Roosevelt Institute, described here as left-leaning, which I guess it ever so slightly is, said that the coronavirus has opened people's eyes even further to the need for a universal single-payer healthcare system like the Medicare for All. These progressive policies have been popular for a long time, Wong said. I think COVID-19 will make them more popular as it becomes clear just how fragile our American political economy really is. The latest figures led to calls for Biden to drop his stubborn opposition to Medicare for All and join with a majority of Democratic voters and the American people who now recognize it as a necessary solution to the nation's healthcare woes. Hey, Joe Biden, as a Democrat running for president in a pandemic, this looks like a popular idea. Let me share this with you. This was said by Michael Lighty, a health policy expert and advocate, pointing at the poll. He said, this looks like a popular idea. And Ryan Knight on Twitter said, Dear @Joe Biden, 69% of all voters now support hashtag Medicare for All, including 68% of independents and 88% of Democrats. It's no longer a tenable position for you to oppose Medicare for All and be the Democratic nominee. It's time for you to put the people first. And then there's a link to a Newsweek article. Earlier this month, Biden put forth a proposal to drop the eligibility age for Medicare from 65 to 60 as an apparent effort to win over supporters of Bernie Sanders, who suspended his presidential campaign a week earlier. But critics, as Common Dreams said, the plan does nothing to address the fundamental failures of the corporate-driven healthcare system that often ties coverage to employment, leaves tens of millions uninsured or underinsured, and leads to spiraling costs. In new reporting by Politico, meanwhile, advocacy groups such as MoveOn.org confirm they're going to make pushing Biden to the left on healthcare a focus in the middle of the ongoing coronavirus crisis and through the general election season. Obviously, the pandemic, with both its health and economic impacts, has become the top issue everyone is talking about, said Dan Hakalik, who is the senior political advisor at MoveOn. And he said to Politico, quote, "It's all-encompassing. It's impacting every aspect of our lives. It's the key issue we're working on, and it's going to be an issue through November." While Julian Brave Benoist Cat, of the progressive think tank Data for Progress, said his group's general belief is, quote, that the quote unquote establishment is going to tell the left to fuck off on Medicare for all, unquote. Other Democrats have aligned with the Sanders wing of the party. I believe there is still opportunity to move Biden and others in leadership. Healthcare Now tweeted that Medicare for All will be on the Democratic Party platform this year. God, I hope so. It's been a long wait and a long fight for that to happen. And Pramila Jayapal, co-chair of the Congressional Progressive Caucus and lead sponsor of the Medicare for All Act of 2019 in the House, said she had no illusions about who Biden is on the issue, but that they were going to pressure him nonetheless. She said, I'd be fooling myself if I thought Joe Biden would embrace Medicare for all. But I do think there's room for him to move much more than he has so far. Appearing on Ali Velshi's program on Saturday morning, this morning, Bernie said he also believes Biden can be pushed to embrace something closer to his vision of complete Medicare for all. Specifically, Sanders said the former vice president could support lowering the Medicare age to 55, as well as making all children under the age of 18 eligible, and that would be some of the things that Joe Biden can do without embracing a full Medicare for all concept. Why is Bernie always looking for an out for Joe Biden? Go at him strong. This is not the time to pre-compromise. It has to be Medicare or bust. It's got to be Medicare, okay, or bust. If Biden wants our support, he's got to swear on a stack of Bibles that as soon as he gets in and has a majority in both houses of Congress, he is going to pass Medicare for all. He's got to understand that Paris is worth a mass, to quote Henry IV, who converted from in order to be crowned the King of France. He converted from a Protestant sect to Catholicism on the eve of his coronation as the French king. Joe Biden needs to do the same with respect to Medicare for all. He needs to pass Medicare for all. He needs to swear on a stack of Bibles he's going to pass Medicare for all. That surveyed 958 voters between April 19th and April 20th, has a margin of error of plus or minus 3.17 percentage points. So it's a pretty good poll in terms of the margin of error. There's one more thing I wanted to show you. I will share the screen again. This time we'll go to Twitter. I'm on the wrong Twitter page. Let me turn on what's happening and see if I can get. I'm looking for the trends on Twitter. Anyway, trending earlier today I don't know why I can't see the trends. Maybe they're in this view. Anyway, the hashtag dropout Biden was trending earlier today. Last time I saw the figures on it, it was at 100, okay, and 11K. It was getting worked on since this morning, and a lot of people got enthusiastic about it. Let's see if I can find that little bar. So I don't know what happened to drop out Biden. Maybe I can find it somewhere else. Let's see. This is quite annoying. Maybe the way Twitter is displayed in this particular browser. Ah, here it is. Okay, Kim Jong is at 97.2. Last time I looked, they took dropout Biden off. They got rid of it. Last I saw, okay, it was at 111K. Biden probably got Twitter to take it down. I cannot find it. I really wanted you guys to see that. Yeah, drop out Biden. Was trending. I don't know how high it got before they took it down. Maybe some of you can make some comments on that. Okay. And maybe you know what happened. But I do not know what happened. Okay, so that was the other piece of news, that people are so dissatisfied with the choice that apparently has been made by the Democratic Party that just at the time when we are tweeting, when we're tweeting out the Biden record, there were other people who were tweeting out but drop out Biden. I think that is very significant. There are a lot of people out there who want to do the same thing that we want to do. And that brings me, of course, to the new group that we've started on Facebook. The name of the group is the Biden Record. Here's the graphic. Uh-oh. Key parts of the graphic are no longer there. We'll have to see what we can do about that. There's an announcement, okay, which is a description of the purpose of the group. 3 short paragraphs. But you can search for the Biden Record, and that is our page. We are soliciting at this point as many members of the group as we can get. There are now 20 members of the group, and 7 are admins, okay, and moderators. So you have a lot of people to share the burden. And you can see who they are. If anybody else would like to be a moderator, let me know. And we will try to make you a moderator. Okay, so here we are. People are posting things now. There are discussions. Once again, I've forgotten to share my screen. So yeah, you can see the Biden Record group here. Let's see what it looks like when I go home. Okay, if you want to see the full photos, if you click on the graphic here, it will take you there. And you can see the graphic has all the main issues with Joe Biden's record. The only one that's missing, because it's still a series, okay, of allegations, is the Tara Reid affair, which we have been learning about for some time now. Now, that was a lot of the motivation for the hashtags on Twitter today for the people urging Biden to drop out. No question, the momentum was being provided by the outrage over what happened to Tara Reid. At some point, when it's more clear what the facts are, of course, that will be added to the list of key parts of Joe Biden's record. So, also posting things. I'm on the discussion page right now. And you can see there are quite a few posts. And Lana points out Biden picks Larry Summers. You can't make this stuff up. Right. And I covered Larry Summers last night. Right. Thank you, Amber Lee or Rodrigo, for the beautiful graphics. Yes, indeed, Amber Lee. Thank you very much. I pinned my description up there, so that should be there, but permanently. Interesting post here already. So join this very cool group, and we'll work hard from now, until the convention to get the Democratic Party to change its collective mind, if we can call that a mind. And David Ozinga shared a link. Know your enemy, know your regressive progressives better. And the DNC leverages Larry Summers for strategic leadership in the 2020 presidential race. Yeah, Larry was a great strategic leader at the beginning of the Obama administration, wasn't he? He was the one who shielded all the bankers from the pitchforks and the wrath of we peasants. He was the one who advised that the banks should be bailed out, but the people never. We owe a lot to that guy. And we don't owe him any good things. And Sandy shared, she shared a PolitiFact. And quote, we found that Biden tried to oversimplify his complicated record on busing. He glossed over the fact that he regularly opposed busing, even though he supported other civil rights measures such as the Voting Rights Act and the Civil Rights Act. That was factual. Biden's rating on that one was mostly false. But we should be careful when it comes to accepting PolitiFact. We should be careful because they are very, very biased. Very, very biased. Okay, so this program, the In-Depth Show, has now spun off its second group, the Biden Record Group. The first group is the Certified by Letters Group, which has been there to support getting overt congressional financing recognized by the Congress, and adopted by the Congress. So I'm going to start looking at your comments today. Thank you all very much for funding. I'm sorry for coming. Sorry. Didn't mean that. And so, Steve Gonzo says, MAGA morons are emptying the disinfectant vials, drinking the Trump cure into the hospital with severe esophagus and lung damage, SMH. And Dolores says, shared. And Rick says, evening all, damn, I overslept. Deborah Wilson says, wouldn't it be a happy thing to see 45 removed from the Oval Office? Oh, wouldn't it be happy? Evelina says that would leave Mr. Pence. That would leave Mr. Pence, and Mr. Pence is pretty horrible, but he wouldn't have acted this way over the corona crisis. I don't think he would. He's been too conservative a politician for that. Too much a mainstream type of politician. Okay, and belying what he says, in private, he would have listened to the scientists on this one. Steve says, why isn't hashtag dropout Biden #3 trending? No, I saw it earlier. It had 111K tweets, Steve. It should be #1. They must have taken it down. They must have taken it down. They must have decided it didn't meet their community standards. What community standard? The community standard of support for the establishment, of course. Okay, the community standard of denying people their voice, of course. Evelina says not much of improvement from the Oval Office in a straitjacket. Kay says, I doubt Pence, could get elected in November, though. Yeah, I doubt he could motivate the movement on the other side sufficiently to get elected. Of course, with Biden running against him, if we're unsuccessful in getting him out of there, who knows? Okay, Evelina, my spouse who holds a Juris Doctorate, says one at a time, because after all, he is complicit in this total mismanagement of the highest office in the land. We don't really know if he's complicit. He looks complicit, but we don't know what he's saying inside. And we'll probably never find that out. Have a woman treated for the purposes of depression statistics? Can't say, Stacy. I can't say. Kay says, yep, I think so. He doesn't have the followers the Orange Idiot has. No, and they don't have that kind of intensity. His followers don't have that kind of intensity. Evelyn says, true, it would set in motion a chain of events. It would. But Sharon Anthony Connor says, Ashford got $60 million, and they said they're not going to return it. Oh, maybe they'll face some legal action from Steve Mnuchin. I'd like to see that. Sharon Anthony kind of says they need to ban any publicly traded companies from getting loan money. Yeah, especially from the small business program, right? If they're publicly traded, they don't need a small business bailout. They got stock market bailouts. Kay says, the corruption in both parties makes me sick. Me too. Yeah, me too. It's amazing. I think all the articles from tonight really illustrated how corrupt things are in Washington. The fact that Nancy Pelosi has taken so long to present the other party with a bailout bill for the people and dare them to vote against it. That's something. She should have done that, and the Democrats, if they voted against it, should be happily running on that. Jay says, still haven't gotten mine, Richard. Okay, and also Dolores says, I haven't got mine yet either. Hopefully next week. Kay said, yes, I have heard the 1st of May too, Dolores. And Dolores says, an online friend got his in the mail with a letter signed by the Orange Idiot. Laugh out loud. But Native Americans are not being represented in CV stats. They're marked as other. Oh, wow. Okay, says, Steve, those poor people, we have so abused them since day one of coming here. Russ Goldman says I've not received the 1,200 and no CARES Act pandemic unemployment assistance. Yeah. It was pie in the sky. It was pie in the sky because they did not have the infrastructure. Okay, the neoliberals allowed the infrastructure of the federal government, including the unemployment insurance program, to atrophy over a period of years. Because, of course, they've been starving the state and local governments, and those governments, in turn, have been starving the unemployment programs. Okay, so that's not there for people. And also, because the neoliberals, okay, were running things, it was never established that ordinary people could have accounts at the Federal Reserve for the purposes of receiving money, like, for example, Treasury tax refunds. Or whatever other benefits people are getting from the federal government. Who is Morris, the millionaire? Okay, it's Morris Pearl. He's the chair of the Patriotic Millionaires, Lana. I think you must know him from the MMT conferences. He's been at a number of them, okay, already. Okay, and Lana said, I thought a number of employees was part of the criteria for the loans. I don't know. I haven't seen exactly what the criteria are for the small business loan program. I think it is, but I still think that there are certain companies. Yes, it is, but there's something in the structure. In other words, a company like Ruth's by Chris has lots of local facilities, and each of those subsidiaries, okay, or related facilities has a smaller number, okay, of employees, so they come in under the requirement. So they were using a dodge like that in order to qualify for the loans. That's what was happening. Yeah, there is a number of employee criteria in there. Okay, it says, we the people don't count and haven't in decades my whole adult life. Susan said, what did Bernie get in return for his Biden endorsement? Well, I'm not going to say nothing because I don't know whether he got anything that is not visible to us yet. But at this point, I believe it likely that he got nothing. Susan said Bernie is too afraid the Dems won't like him. Yes, I believe that too. Susan says hashtag drop out Biden. Yep. Kay says, I think Bernie hopes he will be of more help to the people in the Senate right now with all this crap going on. Hang out a second. Let's see what happened to my dropout Biden tweets today. I just wanted to there we go. There's me. Well, my dropout Biden tweets are here. So they didn't simply cut out those tweets, but they're no longer reporting the trending on that hashtag. Let me see something. Now, when I search for Dropout Biden, there are all manner of tweets they're still here, but I don't see any totals. Anyway, I just wanted to check that out. I'll be back checking out your comments now. Hashtag unendorsed Biden. Yeah. Kay says, I think Bernie hopes he will be of more help to the people in the Senate right now with all this crap going on. I think that was one of his considerations, but I think he could have been of help to the people in the Senate and not suspended his campaign. Susan says Trump is losing support in the swing states. If this continues, Biden will win easily. He doesn't even have to do anything. It could be. Trump is losing support all over the place. Biden did a live stream today, something to do with labor unions. Did anyone watch it? Susan says no. Susan says, I don't believe anything Biden says. Me neither. He's a notorious liar. Okay, Deborah says, here's the deal. Biden is owned by the insurance company. He's owned by the pharmaceutical companies, too. And he's owned by the credit card companies. No chance he'll relent on his stance, okay, of vetoing Medicare for all. And Lana says, I don't believe him either. That's not why I asked. I want to know if he was stumbling over his words and what was the attendance, etc. And Russ says, I'm going to hit the bed a little early. See you again soon. Thank you, Russ. Hopefully we'll see you Monday. And Steve Gonzo says, soon to be 21 members. Great. And Kay says, CNN is having a special report on climate change right now. So many just don't get it, okay, at all. Lana says, I think the description is good. Kay says, glad my post on there was a good one. It was a good one. Deborah says, thanks. Nancy Blackmar says, thanks for this evening. Thank you for coming, Nancy. And Evelina says, some people are suggesting Bernie be VP. By your opinion, Doc? That's what people would like to see. And that is what I would like to see as well. But there's a question whether Bernie can do more in the Senate as the chair. In other words, he'd be the chairperson. If Democrats take over the Senate, he would be chairing the Budget Committee. Okay, because he's the ranking member, okay, of the committee now. And from that spot, he can do a lot of good things. Whether he can do a lot of good things as Vice President of the United States depends on whether Biden is serious about having Bernie helping him to govern, and whether he will listen to what Bernie wants in certain areas. And there's no way to guarantee that. It's up to the relationship that the president has with the vice president. And it's also up to Biden's health and how much he can attend to the job of the president. If he's really pretty much a cipher in the presidency, then if Bernie were VP, it would be great, because he could essentially call the shots. But we have no idea whether things are going to happen in that way. So I think, okay, it's difficult. Yep, he's real unhealthy, especially compared to Bernie. Real unhealthy. Looks like I've gone through all the comments. Oh, my brother was here for a while. Oh, my brother Hal. Deborah Wilson said, oh, yeah, my spouse who holds a Juris Doctorate. A Doctor of Laws. Yes, he could become president. That, of course, is the dream. And that's why he might accept if Biden wanted him to run along with him as the vice president. But Biden has already said that he wants a woman vice president. But with all the problems we face now, and with when it comes to the choice of a woman, the only one that I would trust to go along, with Bernie's agenda, if she became the president, would be Nina Turner. She would be the only one. And I don't think Biden is ever going to nominate her, in part because I don't think that he would think that she could help him to win. I don't think that he would recognize that she'd be able to command Bernie's troops. So I think if Biden does not nominate a woman, he might look at Bernie Sanders, because he does need Bernie's support. And Rick Maynard said he said he'd consider a Republican as well. Oh, God. That would be a stupid move. Yeah, Nina isn't on his radar. I know. She's not on his radar. Someone who is on his radar, though, is probably Tulsi Gabbard. I don't know if I trust Tulsi Gabbard. Okay, that's the problem there. No question, she has a good record as a representative, in Congress. She has a progressive record. Any other comments or questions? Okay, if not, I thank you all for coming. Thanks for sharing. I neglected, to remind you to share. Sharing was somewhat light tonight, I think. I see that I have roughly 28 shares, at this point. Anyway, please share this, as much as you can. Kay says, I don't trust the Tulsi much at all. Yep, me neither. And Dolores says, thank you and good night. And thank you and good night, Dolores. I see some Z's there. That's meant to be a suggestion. Okay, good night all. I'm ending the stream.